Hello everyone and welcome to your final math project. You should have received this cheat sheet to help you out with answering all the questions, along with a copy of the handout. I think it's labeled Math in the Real World. And basically you're going to be creating a survey that other students will take and evaluating the results using all of the methods that we have been using in this class. So step one is going to be creating your survey. And the important thing to add here is that we're going to be looking at things that are numerical or countable. So we want to create a hypothesis and then test using a certain question so we can prove it right. So we're also going to evaluate our data and create a graph. So we're going to be using the data that we will export from our surveys. And I just wanted to give you a summary of what I was looking for, all of the standard things, mean, median, mode, standard deviation. You guys know all that stuff already. And part 3 is just vocab. There are 12 questions and I want you to use full sentences. Other than that, I just want to give you a list of what you need to submit for the project, along with a rubric that should help you out knowing where exactly I'm going to be grading all of your answers. So we can start now by going over to Google and starting out by creating our Google form or Google survey. So we want to start by logging into your BayPath account, clicking over to the app section and then down to more, and you'll see that purple icon that says forms, and that's all you want to click on. And it should bring you to this page hosted by Google. I have already sent out a bunch of these, so I have some already saved, but we want to either start a blank one or start a blank quiz. Usually that's the easiest one to do. So while that opens, it should create something like this with a generic title. We just want to replace that with whatever we are testing for. So I'm just naming mine after the class and then labeling it as a survey. And you can add a little description. So I want to measure how much do you like math. So we'll make it on a scale of 1 to 10. So by doing that, we can put a linear scale in so that we can have our survey participants only able to select a certain range of numbers, which will make it a lot easier for us to keep track of those numbers. So if I just start the question by saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like math? Let's start there. So I said a scale of 1 to 10, so you can update your scale by just clicking on the right, and you can give little labels for each side so people know. So I'll type the first side as "you gross, I hate math," which seems fitting for clicking on 1. And for my second label, I can just put "I'm a math professional." So now that your scale is all set, we are actually all done creating our one question. So we can go into our settings. We just want to mingle around in here, make sure everything's okay. So if you're sending things to people outside of BayPath, you want to take out that restricted access. If you want to limit the amount of time someone can take it, if you want to give people progress bars, if it wants to be a quiz, ours is just a survey, so we can uncheck that so people don't get actual point values from our survey. So we can go ahead and save that. It also might be important to remember that there is a required field technically, so you can turn that on to make sure that somebody has to answer your question. You can also relabel what it's called, like you can with all Google documents. There's a lot of options that you can do for Google Forms. You can change colors, you can see a preview of what it looks like for participants taking it. You can make sure it works. You can go back to edit it. You can make sure all of the buttons are clickable. You know, just really make sure that it's what you're looking to submit. So we'll close out of that. and go back to our survey. So once it looks all set, we can send it off. So you just want to type the email addresses of all the people in this class for certain, but if you have any other people you know who you can force to take the survey, because you need at least 10 participants, we can send that out, and we can always change the message before we send it. But in preparation for this class, I made sure that I filled one out ahead of time. So you can always go back using that little arrow. If you have a previous one you want to look at, mine is right over here. And while I'm selecting this, it's important to note that I did make a hypothesis that most people would rank on a scale of 1 to 10 around a 7. So once you have your 10 responses or more, you can just click on the responses in your quiz that you set up. You can see that all the people took your quiz, which is good, and it actually gives you a little graph or infographic, bar graph, however you want to think about it, of your results. So you can actually copy it and paste it into your Word document for later, but what we really want to do is export these files. So we want to download them as a CSV and save the file so that we can open it on our computer. Once it's downloaded, you should see a little pop-up that you're able to open it, or you can go into your downloads on your actual computer, like right here. So just remember, downloads should be in there. That's my rubric I made earlier, waiting for it to load. There it is. All right, so it is important that you save your file as, and always remember that you want to save it as something memorable. So you also want to make sure that you save it in a place that will hold on to it. So I always like my documents, MAT120 final project, great name, so we can save that. And then also, something that I missed the first time, you want to make sure that you are saving it as an XLS file, which is a Microsoft Excel file. So you just want to make sure it is ending with .xls, and then save, and then that bar should go away. And now we are left with just our data. So our data is kind of all cramped up. So if you select all of your column headers, you can double click and space them all out so they look a lot better, and you know it's easier to click around. So the things that we're measuring are highlighted here on a scale of 1 to 10. How much did they like math?
Data set up for all of our participants. You can see that we had an array of numbers. Some are missing, some were included on our scale of 1 to 10, but everything seems to be in order. We have 10 results, so we're ready to go. So we want to set this up like a normal distribution table, like we've been making for a long time now. So we can start by making our possible outcomes, which we can also think about as our X outcomes. So the numbers that were clickable and possible were 1, 2. My computer is going very slow. Oh my goodness. So if we highlight these, remember we can always drag down to get to our total amount. And let's pass them because we don't need it. Or possible answers that surveyors could give. So now all we want to do is write down how many times they occurred so that we can get the probability of those results. So we're going to be looking at the number of times an outcome was observed. And I ran out of space a little bit. So let's stretch that one out. All right, so all we're doing is looking at however many times X result happened. So if we were looking for how many times 1 happened, we could look in our list of outcomes or answers, and we got 1. So there was 1 person who answered 1. For 2, same thing. There's only 1 result for 2. So our number of times our outcome was observed was once. For 3, we again have the same thing. Only 1 person answered with a 3. 4, we didn't have anyone answer that they believed they liked 4 on the scale. So we'll put a 0 there. For number 5, it showed up once. So again, we'll enter 1. 6 did not show up. So 6, we will put a 0. 7 showed up once. So they get a 1. 8 showed up twice. So they have a 2. 9 showed up 0 times. So we enter 0. And 10 was entered 3 times. So that will be our last result. The reason that these numbers are more important than these numbers, not that they are more important, it's more of a translation of our results. And if you remember, our probability is the number of times an outcome was observed over the total number of times an outcome was attempted or a trial was run. So out of the total people who took the quiz, which was also 10, these particular number of outcomes happened from those 10 survey results. So next, we'll be looking at our probability of X. So if my cursor will move, we can label this next one as P of X, as we often do. The only thing that's really out of the norm is this, and it's only because that's what we're going to be using to calculate our probability as opposed to being given our probabilities. So again, our probabilities are going to be the number of observed outcomes divided by the total number of results. We'll think about it that way for now. So, just going to put a little spacer in there. So let's see. Our first equation, remember that since we're in Excel, we can start an equation anytime just by entering an equal sign. So I'll start here with an equal sign. And we know that we have this number of results as our numerator, because it's the number of times something was observed. And it's going to be divided by the total number of results we had. So since 10 people answered the survey, we're going to divide by 10. It's important to note that 10 is not because our scale went from 1 to 10. It's because 10 is the amount of people who took the survey. So we always want to be dividing by the total number of people being surveyed, total number of things being measured. So if we hit enter here, it will auto-populate our probability. And if we select in here and then drag down to the bottom, it will auto-populate the rest of our calculation. So now that we have our P of X column, we can move on to our multiplication column. So like normal, let's just fill in all of the rest of our columns. So our next one is usually our X times our probability of X. Then we move on to squaring our X so that we can use it in the next equation. So remember, to square something in Excel, all you have to do is use the caret, which is just shift 6, and then a 2. And then our very, very last one is X squared multiplied by our probabilities of X. So now that these are set up, we can fill in for our equations. So again, remember, equal sign is how we enter in Excel so they know that we want to start an equation. and we're going to be taking this first value, multiplying it by our second value. So since our first value is x, we want to stay in the same row, so row 15. We want to select our x, which is just our possible outcome, and we want to multiply by using Shift 8 or an asterisk. So we're indicating that it's being multiplied by our probability of x. So if you just click here, and you can see our two corresponding cells make sense for our equation, and we can press return or enter. Again, this calculation makes sense. We multiplied 1 times 0.1, it should stay 0.1. So we can get our little black X here and drag all the way down so it autofills all of our future. So moving on to the easier one, we can click in here. So again, we want to indicate to Excel we're making an equation. So we'll type an equal sign. And all we want is our x value squared. So if we go over to our x value, staying in row 15, we just take that value, use the caret, and enter 2, and it will square that value. 1 squared is 1, still off to a good start. And then we can just drag down, and it will auto-populate all of those equations as well. And then moving on to the very last one, we want to make our equal sign to indicate we're making an equation. Select, again, we're staying in row 15. So we want our x squared value. We add an asterisk to indicate we're multiplying, and then multiply it by our probability of x staying in the same row. Again, makes sense. So we want to copy the equation all the way down and fill all of these cells. So this should look familiar. It should look like all of the distribution tables we've made, except for we had to calculate our probabilities. So now that all of our data is entered, we can start using it to find our bigger calculations. So remember, our mean is just the sum of our x times p of x values, and we're going to be using this last column to calculate the standard deviation. So to do that, we need to do our summations, which again just means sum or addition. So we always like to add up our p of x values because we want our probabilities to always equal 1 because we're looking for 100% of our results. So we set up our equal sign. We can start by entering an actual equation for Excel to calculate for us. So if we enter sum, S-U-M, you'll see that it will auto-populate with an option for sum, and we can select all the way down for all of our values, and then simply press enter, and it will automatically add all of the numbers in that column. So instead of typing it again, remember that you can get a black X this way and multiply it across the row. And then we don't need a summation of this particular column, so I like to delete it. So now that we have the building blocks for our particular calculations, we should probably go back and look at what we need calculations for. So reopening the final project guidelines, I guess we'll call them for now. We need our mean, median, mode, standard deviation, probabilities we calculated in the P of X. Yeah, I think that's really it. So we need our mean, median, mode, and our standard deviation. So remember, our mean is actually the summation of our x times p of x, so we can always enter an equal sign and just select another cell we want it to equal. So our mean should stay the same. So it's important to remember that for median and mode, we're going to be using the results we actually received as opposed to the results we calculated because it's based off of the survey results. So if you type equals, median is actually an option. So if you double click and then select our normal set of data and then press enter, it tells us that our median for our results is 7.5. We do the same thing with our mode, so equals, M-O-D-E, and that will tell us our most often received result. So selecting all of these, equals, and you'll get 10, which makes sense because we received 3 10s and nothing else happened 3 times. So the hardest calculation that you're going to have to do is the standard deviation, but again, not that bad. So all you have to do is equals, and we're going to be taking the square root of the summation of this last column subtracted by the mean squared. So we have a shortcut for the square root, so SQRT, and we want the square root of, again, the summation of our last column subtracted by our mean, so we can enter this number, squared. And then close the parentheses, and you should be all set with your calculated standard deviation. So that should be everything that you could possibly need for calculating your distribution table, which is just this portion, and then your mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. But there is one other part in the very fun math project, and that is creating a histogram or bar graph from your results. So if we go back into our spreadsheet, you would think that you want to create your results from this section, but you actually want to do it from your percentages because that's what's making up 100% of your results. So if you simply select here and drag all the way down, you don't want to include the 1 because the 1 was your summation of this column. We can go into insert and we can insert a chart or graphic. So if we select column, we can actually see a clustered column here, which will hopefully look like a histograph. So that auto-populated these results, which look to seem very accurate. We had one result for 1, one for 2, one for 3, and then all the way up to 3 for 10. So this does make sense, and it does look a whole heck of a lot like where we pulled our information from. So that's a great sign that we did everything right. You definitely want to double check that your results are matching, and you can include this chart. You can leave it here in your Excel sheet, or again, you can go in and copy and paste it here and submit this to me. Whatever you like to do is a-okay by me.